My sister sent the text on a Thursday afternoon, while I was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing permit timelines for a redevelopment corridor that stretched 6 blocks through the east side of the city. Hey, so Dad asked me to reach out about the anniversary dinner. I know this might be a little awkward to hear, but he thinks it might be easier for everyone if you sit this one out. Alec's parents are flying in from Denver, and they're pretty traditional. You know how it is, it's not a big deal, we'll celebrate with you separately, just the four of us. Something low-key that's more your speed. No hard feelings, okay? Love you. No hard feelings, love you. I set my phone face down on the stack of zoning reports and stared at the window. Outside, 2 sparrows were fighting over a piece of pretzel on the fire escape. I watched them for a long time. Have you ever been erased by the people who were supposed to know you best? Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, over years of small assumptions and convenient silences? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. My mother didn't call. That was how I knew she agreed with it. When my mother disagreed with something my sister did, she called to soften it. Damage control was her love language. The silence meant she'd sat at the kitchen table with my sister and helped draft that text, probably suggesting they end it with "love you" to make it land easier. The dinner was at the Alderton, a restored Beaux-Arts building downtown that my family had been raving about for 3 months. One of those places where the prefix starts at $195 per person, and the waitstaff all wear matching black aprons with the restaurant's name embroidered in white. My parents had made the reservation back in February for their 35th anniversary. It was by every account the most important dinner they'd planned in years, and according to my sister, I was too low-key for it. What she meant was I was too much of a reminder. 3 years ago, I left my job as a corporate contracts attorney at a firm in Midtown. Not because I failed, because I burned out so completely that I sat in my car outside my office building for 45 minutes one morning, unable to make myself go inside. I called my then husband and asked him if he thought I was making a mistake staying in law. He said without hesitation, "You've always been too sensitive for that world." 2 weeks later, I filed for divorce. The divorce was the part my family never got over. Not that I'd walked away from a 6-figure salary in a prestigious firm. The divorce. The optics. What would they tell people? I was 30 years old with a 4-year-old daughter, renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood my mother called transitional, taking contract work wherever I could find it. They never asked what the contract work was, they assumed. My father, Roy, had spent 30 years as a commercial real estate broker. He understood value in terms of visible assets, the watch you wore, the neighborhood you lived in, the firm name on your business card. When I left the firm, he looked at me the way he'd look at a property that had lost its zoning variance, diminished, reclassified. My mother, Donna, was more subtle. She didn't say I'd made a mistake. She just stopped mentioning my work at family dinners. My sister Reese was a pediatric nurse practitioner, engaged now to Alec, whose father was a state senator from Colorado. Those were the credentials my mother led with when talking to her friends. When the conversation got to me, she'd say I was figuring things out. I'd been figuring things out for 3 years. What they didn't know was what I'd been figuring out. After I left the firm, I took a temporary consulting role with a small urban planning nonprofit, mostly just to pay bills while I found my footing. The work was supposed to be a stopgap. Instead, it rewired something in me. Urban planning sat at the exact intersection of everything I'd been trained for: law, policy, community negotiation, long-range contracts, but it actually did something. You could drive past a block you'd worked on and see it differently. You could point to a transit corridor or a rec center and say, that exists because of choices made in rooms I sat in. Within a year, I was consulting for the city directly. Within 2, I was principal lead on the Eastgate Corridor project, a $580 million public-private redevelopment initiative spanning 12 blocks on the east side of the city. It was the kind of project that got written up in urban planning journals, the kind where other cities sent delegations to study the model, the kind where your signature was on documents that mattered for the next 20 years. But I drove a sensible Honda. I still lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment, though I owned it now. I kept my daughter Poppy in the same school she'd been in since pre-K, because she loved her teacher, and I wasn't going to uproot her for the sake of a better zip code. When I showed up to my parents' house for the holidays, I came with grocery store flowers and leftover Halloween candy, and I sat quietly while my mother updated everyone on Reese's career, Reese's relationships, Reese's upcoming trip abroad. They didn't ask about mine. I picked up my phone again, reread my sister's text, read it a second time, more slowly. Then I set it down and went back to my permit timelines, because in 11 days I had a ceremony to attend. The city was hosting a formal closing event for the Eastgate Corridor project. The ribbon cutting for the first completed phase had happened in the spring, But this was the official close, the financial reconciliation signing, the community impact presentation, the deputy mayor's commendation for the project leads. The venue the city's events office had selected was the Alderton. The same Alderton. My parents' anniversary dinner was in the private dining room on the second floor. The city ceremony was in the grand ballroom on the ground floor. I was aware of this because my assistant had flagged it 3 weeks earlier as a potential parking conflict for our guests. I had not flagged it to my family. I thought about calling my mother. I genuinely did. I thought about texting Reese and saying, "Actually, you might see me there." But I thought about all the years I'd spent making things easier for them, smoothing over my own exits, minimizing my own presence, staying quiet so that Reese could shine without the complication of a sister who'd gone sideways. And I decided to let the evening unfold on its own. I wasn't setting a trap, I was just doing my job. I sent Reese one text back, "No hard feelings, have a wonderful time." The 11 days moved the way days do when you're on deadline, in blurs of coffee and revision cycles and conference calls with engineers who talked about drainage specifications like they were delivering poetry. My daughter Poppy, who was 6 and had recently decided that the highest compliment she could give anything was to call it actually pretty good, informed me on the morning of the ceremony that my black dress was actually pretty good. I told her that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me all week. She nodded seriously, like she understood the weight of that. The babysitter arrived at 5. I kissed Poppy's forehead and told her I'd be home by 9:10 at the latest. "Will there be fancy food?" she asked. "There will be very fancy food. Can you bring me a dessert in your purse?" I told her I'd try, I always try. I drove to the Alderton in my Honda. The valet stand was staffed by 3 people that evening. The city event and the private dinner upstairs had the building running at full capacity. When I handed over my keys, the attendant looked at the placard on my dashboard, looked at the guest list on his tablet, and said, "Miss Calloway, we have a reserved spot for project leads on level B. I'll bring the car up front when you're ready to leave." I said thank you. It was a small thing, but I noticed it the way you notice things when you've spent years being invisible. Someone saw my name before they saw my car. Inside, the grand ballroom had been set for 200. Round tables with navy linens, small potted herbs as centerpieces, a nod to the community garden component of the Eastgate project. The city's event team had been thorough, the kind of room that takes months to get right and looks on the night like it was always supposed to look exactly this way. I found my seat at the principal's table near the front of the room, said hello to the engineers and community liaison leads I'd been working alongside for 2 years, and accepted a glass of water from a server who moved through the space with practiced efficiency. The deputy mayor, a woman named Yates, who had once spent 45 minutes grilling me about floodplain variants in a city council session, and who I had come to genuinely respect, caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass in a small acknowledgement. At 6:47, the doors to the ballroom side corridor opened, and I heard it. The sound of a larger group moving through a building, the low murmur of people who'd been at the cocktail hour and were now looking for their table. My parents' party. The private dining room was upstairs, but the most direct route from the hotel entrance passed through the corridor that wrapped around the ballroom's north side. The ballroom had glass panel walls facing that corridor, a design feature the architect had called visual permeability, which was a pretentious way of saying that anyone in the hallway could see everything inside. I saw my sister first. Red dress, hair up. She was holding Alec's arm and leaning into him the way people lean when they're performing ease rather than feeling it. Behind her came my father in his tuxedo, walking with the chest-forward posture he adopted at events where he wanted to signal that he belonged. My mother in deep burgundy, scanning the room the way she always did, cataloging faces and deciding which ones were worth noting. And then my father stopped walking. I watched his face from 20 feet away through the glass. He saw me seated at the principal's table in the front of the ballroom. He saw the navy linens, the assembled city officials, the deputy mayor at the head of the room. His expression moved through confusion so fast it looked like a recording on fast forward. My mother pulled his arm. He pointed almost involuntarily toward the glass. She turned. Her hand went to her collarbone, a gesture I'd been watching my whole life. She did it when she was recalibrating. Reese turned a moment later. She saw me. Her eyes went from my face to the room around me to the name card at my seat, which, at that distance, she couldn't possibly read, but she stared at it the way people stare at things they don't understand, hoping the looking will decode them. What happened next I didn't plan, I couldn't have. Alec's father, Senator Pruitt, who had flown in from Denver and who I'd registered only as a name Reese had mentioned once, turned from my father and looked through the glass wall directly at the principal's table. He tapped Alec's shoulder, pointed. said something I couldn't hear. Alec turned. He looked at me. He looked at the table. He said something to his father. His father shook his head and said something back, more emphatic this time. The whole group had stopped moving. 7 or 8 people clustered in the corridor, visibly uncertain about why the senior Pruitt was standing still and staring at a woman in a ballroom. The deputy mayor had begun her opening remarks. She had the cadence of someone who understood that public speaking was a form of civic service, not performance. She thanked the project team, named the lead partners, and then said what project closing ceremonies always say, but which still lands differently every time you hear your own work described in full. The Eastgate Corridor project represents the largest municipally led redevelopment initiative in this city's history. 12 blocks, 22 community stakeholders, 43 months of planning, negotiation, and execution. This vast project exists because of people who understood that a city's future is not built in press releases. It's built in the rooms most people never see. I want to acknowledge our principal project lead, whose work was foundational to every milestone we are celebrating tonight. She said my name. The room applauded. I stood the way you're supposed to stand when someone acknowledges you in a room like this. I didn't look at the glass wall, I didn't need to. But I felt it, the shift in the corridor, the way sound changes when a group of people go quiet all at once. Senator Pruitt excused himself from the group and came around to the ballroom entrance. He had a senator's handshake, the kind of firm that's been practiced until it no longer feels voluntary. He apologized briefly to the event staff at the door, stepped just inside, and made his way toward me. "I'm sorry for the interruption," he said. My office has followed the Eastgate project since the environmental impact filing. The community benefit agreement your team negotiated is some of the most rigorous work I've seen at the municipal level. I've been citing it to colleagues in Denver for months." I thanked him. I meant it. He wasn't flattering. He had the eyes of someone who had actually read the documents. "I had no idea you were connected to my son's family," he said, and something in his voice told me the calculation happening behind his eyes was not a small one. "Small world," I said. He nodded, seemed to consider adding something, and then said only, "Enjoy the evening." He returned to the corridor. I watched him reach my father and say something brief and clear. My father's face, even from that distance, even through glass, did not recover. The ceremony moved forward. There were remarks from the community liaison director, a slide presentation, a short video from residents in the Eastgate neighborhoods, talking about what the changes meant to them. A woman who said her commute was now 20 minutes shorter. A teenager who describes the new community center as the first place he'd ever gone just to sit and read. I ate a dinner that was, in fact, excellent, and I shared a table with engineers and planners who were already talking about the next project. Because that's what people in this work do. You close one chapter and immediately start looking at what's next. At 8:15, I stepped away from the table and found a quiet stretch of corridor near the coat check. My mother was standing there alone, her burgundy shawl draped over both arms, like she was holding herself together with the fabric. She saw me before I could decide what to do. "Ingrid," she said, and then nothing else for a moment. I waited. "Why didn't you tell us?" Her voice was quieter than I expected, not the voice she used for managing situations, the other one, the one underneath, the one I hadn't heard in a long time. I thought about all the ways I'd rehearsed this conversation over 3 years. The versions where I was sharp, or cold, or generous, or entirely detached. In none of them did I feel what I actually felt standing there, which was mostly just tired. "I tried to tell you," I said. "At Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, I said I was leading a city project. You asked if that was like being a city employee, like a clerk. I started to say no, it's more like, and you changed the subject because Reese had something to share about her new place." My mother's eyes filled, she didn't deny it. "I stopped trying," I said, not out of anger. I stopped because I figured out that what you thought of my work had no connection to what my work actually was. Those two things just lived in different rooms, and I stopped expecting them to meet. "We worried about you," she said, "after the divorce. You seemed so." "I was fine," I said. "I was building something." She nodded, a small movement, more reflex than agreement. "Reese didn't know," she said, and I understood this was as close to an apology as I was going to get tonight, and probably for some time after tonight. "I know she didn't," I said. "That's actually the part that should bother all of you more than it bothers me." I excused myself and went back into the ballroom. My father found me at 9 just as the event was winding down and servers were clearing the last of the dessert plates. He didn't come all the way to my table. He stopped at the edge of the room, in the doorway, and waited. When I saw him, I walked over. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same height he'd always been. But he had the look of a man who'd spent the evening revising something he'd held for a long time and wasn't sure what to put in its place. Senator Pruitt said. He stopped, started again. He used the word foundational. I know what he said, Dad. Why didn't you just? He stopped again, his jaw worked. I told you 3 years ago that leaving the firm was a mistake. I told your mother. I said you were throwing away. I know what you said. Ingrid. He said my name like a question, like he was checking to make sure I was the same person he'd filed under disappointment, and was confused to find the file empty. I'm not angry, I told him. And I meant it. There was no heat left in it, just clarity. I haven't been angry for a long time. What I am is very clear about what I need from a relationship and what I'm not willing to keep absorbing. That list has changed quite a bit in 3 years. Something moved across his face. It might have been the beginning of the right response. I didn't wait for it. Happy anniversary, Dad, I said. 35 years is real, I mean that. I went back to say goodbye to the project team, accepted a very good bottle of wine from the deputy mayor's office that I planned to open on a weeknight after Poppy was asleep, and retrieved my car from level B. It arrived at the front entrance in under 3 minutes. On the drive home, I thought about the moment just before my name was called. Not the applause, not what came after, but the moment before, when I was still sitting and nothing had been said yet, and I was just a woman at a table where she completely unreservedly belonged. That feeling wasn't new. I'd had it dozens of times in the past 3 years, sitting across from a city council member who needed me to walk them through a compliance issue. On the phone with a federal housing liaison at midnight over an equity clause that couldn't wait. Watching Poppy's face when I picked her up from school, and she told me she'd explained to her class that her mom builds neighborhoods. I hadn't needed tonight to confirm anything for myself. The confirmation had been accumulating for years, quietly, in rooms my family had never thought to imagine me in. I got home at 9:47. The babysitter was watching something on her laptop and Poppy was theoretically asleep, though the light under her door suggested otherwise. I knocked softly and pushed it open. She was sitting up in bed with a chapter book and the expression of someone who had been very recently horizontal. You're still awake, I said. I was just finishing a page, she said. I sat on the edge of her bed. She put the book down and climbed into my lap the way she'd been doing, since she was small enough to fit there entirely, which she barely was anymore. All long legs and sharp elbows, and the specific warm weight of a child who still trusts that you can hold her. How was the fancy party? She asked into my shoulder. Actually pretty good, I said. She laughed. It was the best sound I knew. I didn't check my phone until after she fell asleep. There was a text from my mother, I'd love to have coffee this week, just the two of us, if you're open to it, and a longer message from my sister that I read once and set aside for the morning, when I'd have more patience for it. From a number I didn't have saved, which I recognized as Alec's from the area code. My father wants to know if you'd consider speaking at a state planning conference in the spring. He said to tell you he's asking as a professional, not as family. I thought that was the right way to put it. I set the phone on my nightstand. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at 10 o'clock on a weeknight. Still going, just at a different register, the sounds layered differently than they are in the daytime. I thought about my father in that doorway. I thought about my mother's hand at her collarbone. I thought about the drive home through streets that passed, at one point, within 3 blocks of the Eastgate corridor. 12 blocks that now existed differently than they had 43 months ago, where a woman I didn't know had said her commute was shorter, where a teenager had found somewhere to just sit and read. That was the work. Not the ceremony, not the commendation, not the senator's handshake. The work was the thing that remained when you went home. I turned off the light. People talk about proving yourself like it's a destination, like there's a moment when the score settles and you can finally exhale. But that's not what it feels like from the inside. From the inside, it feels like you just kept going. You kept doing the work when the room was empty and no one was watching. And one day you look up and the room is full, and you realize you never actually needed it to be. The best decision I ever made was to stop waiting for my family's permission to be who I already was. The second best was raising a daughter who will never once have to wonder if her mother is proud of her. She already knows.